Hello, my sewing friends. Let's make Butterick 3030. I'm Jen, and this is my sewing room where I made this. This is a scrap busting project that I made because I was all inspired by Stephanie from Stephanie Farrell Focus. And I did it because I've never done it before. And I thought, well, can I do that? I've got so many scraps that are rolled up, and I thought, well, surely I can take some of those and make something really kind of nice. I went looking through my patterns, and I have a lot of vintage patterns, a lot of thrifted patterns, and I came up with this one. This is Butterick 3030. It's from 2001, and it's a collection of 5 tops. The first 2 tops, A and B, are this one and this one. This is just a little t-shirt with a raglan sleeve, and this is more of a tunic. And it turns out that that tunic has a split side like that. So I didn't realize that until I got the pattern piece out. So that's views A and B, and then view C is a dolman sleeve, but it's color blocked out like a checkerboard, and I really liked that. This calls for wovens, but it also said stable knits were okay. Well, I pulled out some knits that I had. So I had these 3 fabrics, and I thought, okay, how can I do this? This was cut to a medium, so I didn't really have to do much other than just figuring out where to cut this raglan version, the tunic, how to make it look like this. And this was fun. It was fun to make, and it's easy to make too. Let me just explain the pattern pieces to you. In order to color block this out, it was really simple. The basic thing you need to know is where you want to separate the top from the bottom. Now on this one, I knew I wanted a top left, a top right, a bottom left, and a bottom right. And I wanted them to be all different fabrics. So basically I needed to know where to separate this. And I measured down, I needed to go 12.5 inches on the center front down, and it just happens that this fold line here to shorten and lengthen the tunic just happens to be right at 12.5 inches. So I took my tracing paper and I traced off just the top half of this. And I added, because I want a center front seam, and this calls for it to be laid on the fold, I'm not going to lay it on the fold. I'm going to cut a separate piece here, separate piece here, separate piece, separate piece. So I went ahead and added seam allowance here. And when I traced it off, I laid it on top of this fold line here, but then I gave myself another 1/2 inch seam allowance. So once again, I traced it off, stopped at this line, which is 12.5 inches, and then I added my seam allowance here. And then while I was at it, I added this seam allowance here so that I will have that center front seam. Same thing when I went to do the lower front. I knew I needed to come up to this line right here, which again was 12.5 inches down. So I went ahead and traced it off, and I added that 1/2 inch seam allowance. There's my line, and you can tell this goes beyond by about 1/2 inch. I also added the seam allowance over here too. That is how you do it. Here's my back piece, and I ended up cutting this. I cut 2 separate pieces. So I cut one going this way, I flipped it over, and I cut another one going this way. And I added a 1/2 inch seam allowance along this center back seam because I wanted to cut 2 of them. One I cut going horizontally, and the other I cut going vertically with the stripes. So when I cut it, in order to divide them, I ended up having to add that 1/2 inch seam allowance right along this center back where you're supposed to cut it on the fold, but I didn't. I cut 2 pieces separately. Now, had I wanted to divide this up like I did the front, but with an upper back and a lower back, and all 4 of them being different, then I it would have been easy. I would just do the same thing that I did with the front. And fortunately, with this particular pattern, the shorten, lengthen lines line up along. Here are my notches. This is my side seam. And so these are my notches to match up my seam. And then you can see these shorten, lengthen lines all lined up. Now that was fortunate for me. So I knew that this on the front piece was right at 12.5 inches. So had I wanted to divide it up, all I had to do was come down to this line, which lines up with this line, and trace it off and add my seam allowance, and I would have been fine. Add my seam allowance here, add my seam allowance here, and I would have been fine. So that would have been really easy. I would handle it just like I did the front piece. The important thing being, once you line up your side seams and your notches, then you can go ahead and just carry that line right across. Now, I am not a fan of reading instructions. I will do it usually unless, you know, it's something simple like a t-shirt. Well, for this one, I started into the instructions and I realized it has a dart at the top of the shoulder on the sleeve. So that was the first order of business, was to make these darts. Okay, here we are at this point. This is what it's going to look like. I have gone around each of these pieces, including the back pieces, and I have interfaced all of the seams. These are just strips of easy knit interfacing that I cut to stabilize all of the edges so that these won't pull out of shape when I go to sew them, even though I'm sewing with a walking foot and a jersey needle. So the first thing I'm going to do is connect these pieces, and this is the front. So the upper front with the lower front and the upper front with the lower front. Now I have one upper front and lower front together, and the other one together. Okay, so now what I need to do is join these down the center front. The important thing here is to match up this seam. This makes it easy because it's easy to see. This is because of the stripe. So I can pretty much line it up that way. But I am going to put a pin through the seam there. Now I've got it going through. And that's going to help me with matching this up. So now I'm just going to pin and then go back to the sewing machine and stitch this. Now I could go ahead and serge this seam so that it lays flat, but I don't think I'm going to do that. I'm just going to serge the two seam edges together, and then I'll just press it to one side. I just don't want to work that hard. And now I have my front done. So there's the front. Now let's put the back together. So here is one side, and here is the other side. I did try to mix it up a little bit. So I'm gonna go ahead and put right sides together, and then I'm gonna go ahead and sew this center back seam. Got my back, got my front. Now it's just time to sew the sleeves in, and because this is a raglan sleeve, like you can see here on the back, I can tell it's the back, well, because I know it's the back, but also my notches, I have double notches here. So all I have to do is look for the top of the sleeve for one thing, and I can tell it's the top because there's the dart. I'm gonna put right sides together. I've got a double notch here, so I'm just gonna pin this like this. So there's one sleeve. Now let me take the other sleeve and I will find that double notch after I find the top of the sleeve. Okay, here it is. And I should have a double notch, and right there it is. So let me pin this side. Now I'm going to go stitch these seams, and then we'll come back and we'll deal with the neckline. Now I have the sleeves on. This is the back and this is the front, and my sleeves are stitched now. So here's my neckline. Okay, now we need to deal with facings. So I've gone ahead and interfaced the back. This is the back, and this is the front. And the front, I have marked the notches. So I have notches here on the front, and I don't have any on the back, but what I'm going to do for the back is just, even though there's kind of a crease here, I'm just going to put a pin in. I could mark it with a pen, but I'm just going to put a pin in. And so there's my facing. Okay, first thing I'm going to do with the facing is put right sides together. So I have the back, this is the front, and I'm going to join these at the shoulder seams. The reason I have marked the center of the back here is because I have a center back seam. So it will be easy to match that up when I go to sew this to the neckline. So right now I'm going to go back to the sewing machine and I'm going to sew this seam and this seam. And then I'm going to finish the edge here by serging. Now it's time to deal with this neckline. So all I need to do now is match up my notches here, and we'll do that. Right sides together, always right side to right side. I'm gonna flip that over so I can match my right sides. This seam, this shoulder seam, I'm going to match to this dart that I put into the sleeve, because that's the top of the sleeve. Okay, so here is my center back seam. So I'm just going to line those up. Once again, right sides together, always right sides together. And I'm going to pin that. Now this is going to be fairly easy to do because my side seams are not sewn. So I have basically a flat circle I can stitch. And that's on purpose. So now I'm just going to go around, and then I'm going to flip it over and I'm going to understitch it, which is stitching very close to the seam, a little bit away. And then I will go over and press, and the neckline will be done. Now what I need to do is turn this inside out. This is the front, this is the back. Get that facing going down just for the purposes of being able to see it there. And now I need to sew at my side seams. I'm going to just measure here. I want to go 5/8 of an inch down. Let's see, let's do this with a smaller ruler. Okay, I want to go 5/8 of an inch down from this, the top of this extension edge. Let me mark that. I'm going to go 5/8 down, and then I want to go 5/8 over. Now this gives me a spot where I want to stop stitching. So what I'll do is I'll stitch my sleeves all the way around, and then I'll come down and I will stop right there to pin together my sleeves. And I will go ahead and pin this and go all the way down and down the side to my dot. And I'll stitch all of that. And then I'll do the same thing on the other side. Okay, what I'm gonna do here is pin down my facing, because I want to go over and stitch in the ditch with all these seams, 2 shoulder seams on each side, and then the center front and the center back. And that is going to hold this facing down. My facing is all tacked down. That facing is not coming out of there. It is tacked down here, 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 and even up here at the tops of the shoulders. So that facing is going nowhere. Now what I'm going to do is, to deal with these extensions, I'm going to take them over to my ironing board, and I'm going to iron steam-a-seam, which is fusible web, but really skinny. And I'm going to iron that along here, and then I can turn this over, tear off the tape, and go ahead and fuse that so that it's hemmed, basically. Turn that facing under and fuse it so that I'll be able to top stitch it later. And the same thing with the hem. I'm going to fold the hem up at about 1 inch, and I'm going to do the same thing with the steam-a-seam. I'm just going to line this up with the finished edge of my extension here, and I'm going to fuse it down. Give it a minute, and then right there at the edge, I'm just going to tear that off. Now what I can do is get a hold of that paper and just peel it right off. This now has fusible web on it, so when I fold this back like this, there. Now, when I do this, I'm fusing that into place. That is not going to go anywhere, because now I basically glued it. And now that holds it there so that when I go to stitch it, it's not going to go anywhere. So that's Butterick 3030, a scrap busting top. If you have any questions about the way I did it, ask me in the comments and we can chat there. And I think that'll do it for now for me. So, as always, if you would like to see 1 or 2 of the other sew-alongs I've done, I have a playlist, and it's right over here, so you can click on that. And let me leave you with my favorite scripture, which is from Micah, and it is, "Do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God." I want to do that every day. I hope you do too. I'll see you.